Why, hello folks. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Valkyr and ways that you could potentially rework her. Now, I recently did a Helminth build guide for Valkyr specifically. And as I was doing that video, I have been spending a lot of time exploring different Warframes these past couple of months as I've been working on different Helminth build guides and really digging into how everything works and what you can do with it. And I've come to the conclusion that, in my mind, I'm gonna say that Valkyr is probably the Warframe out of all of them, in the entire game, out of all 46... I think it's 46 right now. Out of all of them, I'm gonna say she is the one who is in the most dire need of a rework. Because the game has completely passed her by. And she just can't perform the way that she was designed to from the beginning. And, I'm not thinking that the game is going to change all that much to make her good again, so she probably needs to be changed. I don't think, Frost is number one on the list of Warframes that need to be reworked. I don't think Loki is number one on the list. I think Valkyr is number one in the list, because, she's so cool in concept, but just the things that she used to be good at, now everyone can do better, basically. So let's take a look at, her ability kit as it is. She was designed in a different era, and you can absolutely tell that by looking at her abilities and what they do. Her passive, she's got better knockdown resistance, or faster, and yeah, she's a cat, right? They always land on their feet, that's the idea, hey. She has Ripline, which is an ability to pull an enemy towards you, or you can use it to traverse. Now, obviously the issue here is, hey, guess what exists today? Bullet jumping exists today. Yeah, I can traverse with this thing. Like this. Spend a bunch of energy doing it. But why would I? Why would I? Because nowadays I can do this. See? I got bullet jumping. We got the parkour. I can do this. There's so it's become kind of a useless ability. And as far as grouping goes, also quite useless. Because hey, you can pull one enemy with it. That's what it does. Even pulls it too far. Ragdolling the hell out of them. What am I supposed to do with this? Not a whole lot. So that ability was designed in a different era, where the game functioned in a different way. Today it has no use. It has no use. And it's yeah, you can put in the pass, the augment for it. This one. Swing line. And then you can just shoot it for free, or 4 of them if you upgrade it to the max. So you can Spider-Man and swing around, but it doesn't do anything. It just doesn't do anything. Her second ability, Warcry, this is still good. This is still the reason why people play Valkyr. It's a buff, it's for yourself, it's for teammates standing close to you. It increases your armor, it increases your attack speed, it slows down enemies. It's really good. It's really good, and that's still good. Yep, it's just a fantastic buff. I got nothing to say about that. Paralysis, her third ability. This one's a weird one, and it's always been a weird one. Because you can knock down enemies around you, fire, it's a 360. Pretty solid knockback. Like this. That's a bit of a stun there. He gets stunned a bit. Okay. It's a short stun. Now, Is it because they're paused? Is that why they're not getting knocked down? Let's see. That might be it. Let's try that again. No. I don't know, maybe it's just a thing about heavy gunners. Maybe you can't knock down any enemy in the game, who knows. Let's try something else. Let's do some lancers. Yeah, whatever. Whee! No. It's like just... It's just not very good. It's a short stun. And not only is it just like a very short stun, you also drain your own shields when you do it. And then you damage enemies who are around you based on the amount of shields you drain. But that's also a bit of a weirdness because Valkyr has like among the lowest base shields in the game. So even if you like build her for shields, which feels bad, you don't want to build her for shields, but even if you do, it's like it's not gonna do all that much damage. The damage is like kind of laughable. And then finally you have Hysteria, which is, you know, her big ultimate ability that makes her immortal and pulls out her exalted weapons so that you can rip and tear with her claws. And it has the drawback that if the ability ends and you still have enemies around you, you're gonna take a bunch of damage. Because the damage you take while this is active, it isn't entirely negated, it's just stored. It's stored and you have to be in the clear. You have to like not have any enemies around you when you deactivate the ability. And if you don't have any enemies around you, then you're fine. If you do have enemies around you or standing close to you, then you're gonna take all that stored damage and you're gonna die. So, it's like, she's obviously built to be a melee Warframe. That's her design. She has exalted melee weapons, the claws, and they're kind of short range, so she's supposed to be like just, you know, up and in enemies' faces. And she has an ability to pull enemies toward her. And she has an ability to increase her attack speed and her armor. It's just, everything about her design means that she's supposed to be, like, up in the thick of things. Just tearing through enemies. Like a tank, because she has, like, super high base armor. She has, like, the second highest base armor in the game after Lavos. But the problem is that, number one, this ability for grouping, it's a terrible grouping ability. And for traversal, which, you know, she's supposed to be the fast, the cat, and jumping around and zippity-zoop on the battlefield. But the problem is we can just do that with bullet jumping now. Any Warframe can do that. And any Warframe has better options for grouping. Hey, look at this. This weapon, the Proboscis Cernos. This weapon exists. Right? And doesn't that just completely invalidate everything about Ripline when I can just do this? I can group every enemy together. I can do that with a Zaw. Like a Zaw weapon. I can equip it with like the Exodia Hunt Arcane. And then I can use that for grouping. Any Warframe in the game can group enemies today. And we have the Helmet system. So we can actually just use the grouping abilities there as well. Which I did in my Helminth build guide. Where I chucked in chorus and snare to you know, where Ripline used to be. To actually have like a grouping ability there. So her number 1 ability is useless. And her number 3 ability is so weirdly designed. And it feels so incompatible with her set. Because it pushes enemies away. Which kind of isn't really what you want. And it drains your own shields, but you don't have a lot of shields. So it doesn't do a whole lot of damage. And you don't want to invest in shields with Valkyr. That's just never gonna be good. And even like with the augment, there's an augment for that ability as well. That makes it so that, you know, the stun duration is doubled, and it becomes kind of a grouping ability. It pulls enemies toward Valkyr when you cast it, but it not like just it's kind of a slow pull, and it's still not very good. It doesn't sort of like just here. Okay. As you can see, I'm not standing very far away from these guys, but I'm not pulling them in, because the problem with this ability is that it has really, really bad range. It has a range of 10 meters, and there is like no way of increasing that range. So it's just weird. And then we come to Hysteria. And Hysteria is fine in concept. The problem with Hysteria is that, you know, all other melee weapons in the game have scaled away from it. Melee weapons today are in such an insane spot where you can just do such crazy things with them. Absolutely ludicrous amounts of damage. Here, like, here's a Glaive Prime. I put like 1 Forma into this thing. I can just one-shot level 200 enemies with it. That's fine. It's like, I don't even need to build up combo or anything. Here, let's take some heavy hitters here, right? The old classic corrupted heavy gunners. Level 180, yeah. Yeah, let's do that. So we're just gonna group them all together. And then we'll just do this. See? Like, that's what you can just do with any melee weapon in the game today, and just shred through enemies at such a stupid speed. That, like, exalted weapons in general, like Warframes that are built around using these exalted weapons, have sort of fallen by the wayside. Now, the biggest sort of offender when it comes to this is the Acolyte mods and Condition Overload, like these builds. They make all normal melee weapons just so strong, just so ridiculously strong. And the thing about the Acolyte mods is that most exalted weapons can't use them. They can't equip them. So they can never reach the same sort of like level that normal melee weapons can. And that kind of like just defeats the entire purpose of her ultimate ability. Why would I use that when I can just use a normal melee weapon and kill things faster? Right? So, like, with that in mind, like, let's look at how we can rework her. Let's look at what we can do to make her viable again in 2021. And, like, how we can make her kit into something that you kind of want to be using. And also without, like, losing her sort of class identity. Without removing what she's supposed to be. So with the name, as it implies, Valkyr's, you know, derived from, you know, hey, Norse culture, the Valkyries. She's supposed to be the berserker who just goes crazy and rips things up in melee combat. It's funny when you look at, like, an actual Valkyrie as like, just the imagery of it. Like, I think Hildren is more of a Valkyrie than Valkyr is. I don't know. Who cares? She's also a cat. Meow. So she's designed up around, like, hysterical, frantic melee gameplay and risk versus reward, right? That's the entire thing with her. She has her Hysteria, which makes her super strong and immortal and just powerful melee weapons, but you run the risk of killing yourself when you use it. Paralysis, you're supposed to stun enemies around you, but you deplete your own shields while doing it. Like, that's the idea behind her. You take risks for a reward. That's how she's designed. And, you know, to kill people in melee combat. So I want to, like, sort of keep that intact. And have that in mind when designing her. So first up, the first, like, change I would make is actually her passive ability. Because this, you know, recovering from knockdown, it's kind of niche. And it's like, it's not... You recover faster, but if you want to like actually play like the harder content in the game, you probably want to just run with like a primed sure-footed or something instead, to just make sure that you just don't get knocked down anyway. Because getting knocked down often means that you just die. So it doesn't do a whole lot for her. I would do something with this to make it more in line with her number 3rd ability, and I would give Valkyr something to sort of like harmonize with that risk versus reward playstyle. I would make it so that when she is at low shields, or when she's at like 0 shields, she does more damage. That's it. I would make it so that you would try to make sure that you never have any shields with her, or that you're like constantly taking damage or constantly depleting your own shields. Like, to that effect, Hysteria, even when that's active and you are immortal, you can still have your shields drained. So like, you can cast Paralysis and drain your shields, and that's gonna work even when you're in Hysteria. So that would make it so that when you're in Hysteria and when you're immortal, you have a reason to spam this ability, to just increase your damage by just making sure you never have any shields. And even if you're not spamming it, or you're not using Hysteria, it still ties into that whole risk versus reward playstyle. So that's the first thing I would do. When it comes to Hysteria, I mean Ripline. When it comes to Ripline, I would in fact just try to make it into a proper grouping ability. And like, you already have the animations for it. Valkyr Prime, for example, unlike normal Valkyr, when she shoots out the Ripline, she shoots out multiples of it. Here, I'll show you. Let's switch to the one that has Ripline here. Because normal Valkyr, when she shoots out the Ripline, it's just like one hook. But if you look at this, you can see that it's actually multiple hooks. Granted, they only grab onto one enemy, but there is animation for it. Like, there is multiple hooks here instead of just one. So what I would do with Ripline, instead of doing it like this, and you're just throwing enemies past you, I would have Ripline shoot out in all directions. I would have it shoot out as a 360. And pull in all enemies. You can do it, if you still want to be able to use it for like maneuvering and mobility as well, which you can still keep intact. What you can do is you can have it single target with just a tap. And then you can instead hold to shoot it in a 360, and just pull in all enemies that are around you. Again, reinforcing the risk versus reward gameplay. You are putting yourself at risk because you are taking every single enemy that is close to you, and you're just pulling them in to, just into the danger zone. But you're rewarded for it, because that's probably what you want to do. You want to, you want to kill everything. You want them to be close. That would actually make Ripline have, like, a proper use. You can, for the old people who like to play Valkyr the classic way of just riplining around, and I know, like, in Gas City, it can be marginally good at times. But just give it some actual utility as a grouping ability, because that's what it is in today. If you can just make it shoot out in the 360 and just grab multiple enemies and pull them all towards you at the same time, this ability would suddenly become useful. This would be a good ability. And I don't think that's probably all that hard to accomplish, like coding-wise. I think you can probably do that without having to break your back. That's number one. Warcry, I wouldn't touch it. It's fine. It's fine the way it is. It's, like I said, it's the reason why people play Valkyr as it is. There's no reason to change this ability. It can stay just the way it is. Now, Paralysis. like I said, I do want it to synergize with her passive, so that you like get an innate reason to use it and just spam it, even though you don't have a lot of shields. Even though it's never gonna do like a whole lot of damage on anything but the lowest of low-level content, you'd still have a reason to just stun enemies around you constantly. With Ripline being a grouping ability, you don't need the augment for this to like pull enemies toward you. That being said, I would probably, like, if you have a passive that works this way, you probably don't need to change too much about Paralysis itself. One thing you absolutely have to do is you have to like double the range on this thing, because the range of 10 meters is just it makes the ability kind of useless. I know why it has that. It's because of Banshee. Banshee has Sonic Boom. Sonic Boom does like the same thing that Paralysis does, except it doesn't shoot in a 360. It doesn't hit enemies behind you. It's just like it's on a cone in front of you. But as a result, you know, it has more range. But it's the same thing there. Like, you can't actually change the range with mods or anything like that, but it just has a higher base range, so still has some use. And just like going from 10 to 15 meters would make it better, but like, so I guess that's why they keep it at 10, because it's a 360. But that's fine. I mean, I think still you should need to increase the range of that thing a little bit. Because like, if enemies are closer, or you know, if enemies are close enough to where you want to use Paralysis, then they're in kill range, and you're just gonna want to shred through them anyway. You kind of want this to hit enemies that are a bit further away, so that they can get stunned for a bit while you get to them. Especially since like Hysteria has kind of short range, as it is as well with the claws. So yeah, I would increase the range of Paralysis by like a decent amount. Other than that, I think just changing her passive to something that makes you want to use Paralysis is probably enough. It's probably enough to turn that into a useful ability. Turn it into something that can give her a damage boost, because it's a way of manually depleting her shields. And you know, it could also probably give her another layer of survivability, because you could start to abuse stuff with shield gating. If you use like brief respite and like the auger mods, you could intentionally deplete your own shields, and then you can like cast other abilities to gain your shields back, and like restore shield gating, stuff like that. There's probably some cool stuff you could do there. But yeah. Then we come to her final ability, Hysteria. And here's my controversial take, okay? There's actually nothing wrong with Hysteria. If anything, I guess you could say that it's like, oh, it's got bad range. It's got bad range, so you have to use like primed reach for it to be good. But okay, let's just fine. Fine, use primed reach then. That's not the end of the world. You can just put that in, and you'll get decent range. Without primed reach, yeah, you're not gonna hit anything with these, unfortunately. But other than that, it's fine. And like, if you build like a heavy attack build, you can still shred things pretty good with this. The invulnerability is nice. The whole coating the screen in a red tint, and like just all of the craziness and whatnot. It's like, no, I like it. So here's my crazy take, okay? Here is what you need to do to make Hysteria viable. You don't need to change anything else, like at all, about Hysteria. You don't need to change it. You need to nerf melee weapons. That's the real issue. The issue isn't that the talons are too bad. The issue here is that melee weapons are too good. It's like there's... If like, melee weapons are at a point today in the game where they kind of outscale everything. And they outscale everything to such a ridiculous amount that, like, nothing can compete. Primary weapons can't compete. Warframe abilities can't compete. Exalted weapons can't compete. If you want to you know, actually kill things the fastest way possible in the game right now, what you want to do is you just want to do the same sort of melee builds that everyone's using condition overload and stacking status effects and getting up to these you know, combo multipliers. And you can just run around and do these red crits all day long, and like... And like that's the real issue. So if I were to suggest a way to fix Hysteria and make Hysteria a competitive ability again, I would say that these 3 mods, Condition Overload, Blood Rush, and Weeping Wounds, remove them from the game. Just take them out. Remove these 3 mods from Warframe. And melee weapons would no longer be able to, like, do these stupid things where they can just do damage numbers that are 10 times what anything else in the game can do. Now, I know this isn't enough. If you just remove these 3 mods, then people would just switch to doing, like, heavy attack builds instead. So you'd probably have to nerf even more stuff. Berserker is probably an issue, just with the attack speed increases. And, you know, all of the heavy attack mods. Stuff like Amalgam or Organ Shatter for the heavy attack wind-up speed. Killing Blow for more heavy attack damage. Stuff like that. Would probably also need to be tuned down. But in general, like, the problem isn't Hysteria, the problem isn't the claws. We have the same issue with, like, Wukong. If you're gonna do something with Wukong in the Helmet system and replace an ability, you're gonna replace his Exalted Weapon, because his Exalted Weapon is the worst ability that he has in his kit. Because his normal melee weapon is better. If you're gonna replace something with, like, basically any Warframe that has an Exalted Weapon, the Exalted Weapon is most likely the ability that you are going to remove. Like, the exceptions would probably be, I don't know, Excalibur, just because he has, like, infinite punch through with his slash, so it actually gives some range to it, and Baruch, because his fists also have a range to them, which makes them kind of good anyway. And of course Garuda, and the reason why Garuda's talons are good is because, hey, she can equip those mods on them. That's the reason why. Hey, Garuda, she has a good Exalted Weapon. Why does she have a good Exalted Weapon? Well, here's why. It's because her Exalted Weapon can use Condition Overload, Blood Rush, and Weeping Wounds. That's why. But yeah. So that's my crazy take. That's my crazy take on it. With Valkyr. You don't need to change anything about Hysteria. You need to nerf the other melee weapons in the game and just make them worse. And then, you know, she would be competitive again. And then she would stand out of the crowd. Because then she would be, you know, the melee-centric Warframe that she is supposed to be. Instead of every Warframe in the game being a melee-centric Warframe. Because that's, like, the optimal way of playing the highest level content. In endurance runs and stuff like that. Let her have, like, abilities when it comes to melee weapons that just set her apart. Let her have the best grouping ability in the game. Let her be able to stun enemies that are around her. Let her have an Exalted Weapon that just outclasses normal melee weapons, so that people like actually want to play her for that. So you get the melee Warframe that can do the melee stuff that other Warframes can't do, and still have it be sort of a risk versus reward thing. She doesn't have a lot of shields. She survives on armor and healing and stuff like that, which is, you know, it can backfire on you if you don't know what you're doing. That can be cool. So, like, all in all, there's not that much you need to do to make Valkyr viable. If you would just be open to nerfing melee and making melee worse, which I know that they've talked about, that they do think that melee is overtuned right now. But I think we're looking at like probably not small nerfs. Otherwise, if they're not gonna remove those mods, and if they're not gonna like take the nerf hammer to melee, well then yes, you would need to ridiculously scale up the damage on these claws to make them viable. You'd need to probably just like straight up double the damage on these things to make people pick them over just normal melee weapons. So yeah, that's my suggestions in a nutshell. It's like, it's not a whole lot you actually need to do. Change her passive ability to synergize better with her kit. And like I said, I would just make it so that she does more damage when she doesn't have any shields. Just stick with that risk versus reward thing. Change Ripline into a proper grouping ability. Do a hold to cast to fire a Ripline in every single direction and just pull in a bunch of enemies at the same time so that you can go to town with your melee weapon. That's all you need to do to make this ability really good, really viable, and something that's also probably pretty fun to use. Warcry can stay as it is. If you change the passive, Paralysis can stay as it is, so long as you increase the base range of this thing. It just needs to hit a wider area to be worth it. And Hysteria can be changed it can stay the same way as it is if you are open to nerfing normal melee weapons. If you're not open to nerfing normal melee weapons, then this needs to just be buffed. It just needs to be buffed and be able to do way more damage so that it's in line with normal melee weapons. Or if you just want as a band-aid, hey, make this be able to equip the Acolyte mods too. Make this weapon be able to equip Blood Rush and Weeping Wounds. And, you know, then you get a weapon that's in line with normal melee weapons. It's not better than normal melee weapons, but it does like the same damage as they do. And you also get the invulnerability from Hysteria while you do it. That's kind of it. Because otherwise, people just say that this is a panic button. This is just a button you press when you're about to die so you can go immortal for a while and run to safety. But it's like the claws and the damage, like that's not why people use Hysteria, because it's just not good for that. It just doesn't do as much damage as your normal melee does, which is kind of sad, and that's probably not what you want with the design of your game. But yeah, that's it. That's how I would change Valkyr into a Warframe that would use all 4 abilities and be happy about it. With these changes, I would be using Ripline constantly. All the time. I would love it. It would be one of the most fun abilities in the game to use. And I'd probably just goof around with the traversal and stuff as well. If I knew that when I am actually like in combat and dive in, it has a use there too. And, you know, I would probably be spamming Paralysis as well. If it helped me with my passive and it helped me like increase damage and it had enough range to where you can actually hit a bunch of enemies at the same time with it. So yeah, like you don't really need to do all that much to put Valkyr back on the map. She, as it is today, like she's super tanky. She sports some of the best sort of just overall basic tankiness of any Warframe. And that's kind of it. That's kind of the whole thing in a nutshell. With like just these very small changes, you'd have an ability set where you kind of want to use all of them. And isn't that what you're going for, like design-wise? If you have a Warframe where it feels good to use all 4 abilities, and it feels like all 4 abilities are doing something, and they are helping, and they are reinforcing the intended playstyle of the Warframe, and it feels different from other Warframes, and it feels like competitive and viable, like that's all you want, really, right? That should be the goal of how you design Warframes. So yeah, that's it. That's my suggested rework. Let me know in the comment section if you agree, or if you disagree. If there are some other ways you think you could change Valkyr to make her more of a viable Warframe in 2021. What would you do? Which abilities would you change? And, how would you change them? Now, granted, like, just, realistically. Not... I'm assuming that we're talking, like, changes where you still keep the same animations and you still keep the same general idea, and not just, like, giving her completely new abilities where they'd have to code it and they'd have to bring in people to animate the movements and all of that stuff. I'm talking just, how can we take the stuff she already has and actually make it worth using, right? Well, this is my take on it. Let me know if you have your own take. And hey, you know what? Maybe if this gains some traction, maybe someone at EE could listen to it and think like, hey, wow, that sounds pretty cool. That would be something, right? Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back tomorrow with something absolutely and completely different.